Well, for big fans of crossover episodes, we're going in early. This is an introduction. This is me and Michelle talking about, well, West Indies cricket, but we're going to do it on my podcast and we're going to do it on his. So whichever podcast you're listening to, whether it be West Indies on 99.94 or Red Inca, that was an introduction of sorts. There's no Santoki today. I'm Santoki. They're slightly louder and probably talk more than him. And I won't say 100% as much as he do, although maybe now I will, that I said it out loud. But we're going to talk about something that I'm pretty sure that you and I care about more than Santoki does, but he might care about it as well. So you guys, I'm sure you'll have to cover it many times. But the fact that West Indies at the one time has the fastest white ball scorer in the world, and we're going to ignore him to talk about the slowest white ball scorer in the world, Shai Hope, who in my notes I've got here is the anti-Dre Russ. Now, you said something in an episode recently, and I can't remember if it was about, it might have been when talking about the one-day team and how much they've been struggling. And you said, I'm not going to cuss out Shai Hope because he's actually making runs and no one else is. It's not so much that this episode is about cussing out Shai Hope, but it is probably, you know, hanging a lampshade on the fact that he is an abnormally slow white ball scorer for modern cricket, isn't he?
Yeah, most definitely. And it's a weird one, Jared, because and I'm going to be intrigued to see where you stand in it from a neutral perspective. And obviously, I know that you've done the kind of recent video pod looking at Shai and his strike rate. But the reason I'm intrigued to see where you stand in it from a neutral perspective is because it's a, I wouldn't say it's a hot topic in the Caribbean. It has its peaks and its troughs. So in the recent ODI series defeat to India, in the midst of getting destroyed by them, it peaked again, where inexplicably people wanted to say that one of the reasons why we weren't competing with India was because Shai wasn't striking at a competitive enough strike rate. And yeah, you were right. On our pod, I just highlighted that of all the myriad of issues West Indies have in ODI cricket, don't get me. And the thing is, it is an issue. It is an issue. Yeah. But of all the myriad of issues, I think it's currently somewhere near at the bottom to deal with rather than at the top. But if we were a good white ball, and if we were a good ODI side, I do think we would have to unpick in even more depth what on earth is going on.
I was trying to work out like what it's like. It's almost like complaining that you don't have enough leg room on a flight that's about to ditch into the ocean. Like at a certain point, you're right, and I'm sure it is uncomfortable, but you probably have bigger concerns. But at the same time, it is the only reason I made the video. I think I started the video before you guys mentioned it on your pod, and I'm looking at the numbers. And I like an outlier on a chart, right? And, you know, you got Viv Richards as an obvious outlier. You got Shahid Afridi. You got Joss Butler, Jeff Marsh, who's also in that video, just so I could talk about how he used to cover drive naked, hovering over his teammate who was sleeping in the bed beside him. Imagine waking up to like Jeff Marsh's fucking junk just drifting towards you as he plays a cover drive. But that's a whole other thing for another time. But Hope is certainly almost off the charts at the bottom. His strike rate, the only player I could find that was really close to him, and this player started a long time before him, I think was William Porterfield. Now, William Porterfield was a very good, solid player, but he's almost from another era of Irish cricket. He was probably almost of that sort of amateur through to semi-professional era. There was no other major cricketer who scores that slow. It is so noticeable that he has started. I reckon his first one day was what, 2015?
2016. Sim, I think we went on a tour to play a tri-series versus Sri Lanka and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so his first test was 2015, wasn't it?
Oh, so 2015, yeah, for a test, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. So yeah, 2016 for ODIs. I couldn't find another player who started in that period who doesn't have a pretty good strike rate. But I also couldn't find many players in that period who played one-day cricket and had that kind of record, right? Because it is, I mean, he averages almost 50. It feels it feels unfair to target him, except for the fact that a strike rate of 78 was slow when Jonathan Trott was batting at that. And that was a long time ago.
What makes it more peculiar for me is that you can find instances through, I think, how many, I think it's 100, he's over 100 ODIs now. So he's been around. He's actually been around for a while now. And you can find instances throughout the 100 plus ODIs that he's played where he has gone at a strike rate over 100. It's not many, but there are instances of it. And there's been a few instances in T20 cricket, again, few, where he's gone at a strike rate which suggests he has that potentially in his locker. So it's more perplexing to me it would be one thing if he did it and that's all he could do. So, you know, kind of like Craig Brathwaite or Tej Narayan Chanderpaul early in their career, it's like, well, that's all they can do. They can only grind it out. Craig Brathwaite played that century against England where he was there forever. In the recent Test series, however many balls, 500, 600 balls, whatever it was. That's all he can do, if that makes sense. But yeah, Shai has shown on occasion.
He's not Dom Sibley, is he?
Right, exactly. And he has shown on occasion that he's capable of going at a better strike rate. So it's more perplexing that he is. I am of the opinion he is doing it deliberately. But I don't know.
Yeah,
is he playing within himself on purpose?
I want to come to that at the end because I think that's really interesting. Let's start with the plane crash analogy from before, which is ODI one-day cricket. They have been in a terminal decline for 20 years. I'd have to go back to 1999 World Cup to have a look how they were doing then. But I think I looked at the last 20 years and you look at their win-loss percentage and they've had little spikes back up, but it's basically just getting worse and worse and worse. There is something that sometimes happens with players when they play in a team like that and they end up, I mean, you could have said that Chanderpaul was a similar sort of player for the Test team at times, where it's just like at a certain point, you're just like, well, I'm just going to be the one who makes runs and everything else is just going to have to sort itself out around me. But this is a terrible, terrible moment for West Indies one-day cricket. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they had a little bit of luck against Scotland to even make a World Cup, right? And, you know, right, exactly. Would you bet on them to make the next World Cup at the moment? I don't know.
We're going to leave that one in the hands of the gods again. But, I mean...
So this is bad, isn't it? It's a bad one-day team.
It is. It is. And this is why I sometimes cut Shai a bit of slack, because look at the talent or lack thereof around him. And what you have to ask yourself is, who else in that side is capable of batting? I don't even want to say, let's say long. Who else in that side is capable of batting long at a good enough strike rate consistently? And the reality is the answer is no one. But if you're going to pick some names, at a push you'd pick Evan Lewis, who obviously doesn't make himself available anymore, Shimron Hetmyer, who sometimes makes himself available, Nicholas Pooran, who's now the captain. But with the best will in the world and with respect to those three guys, and yes, they all average over 35, but with respect to them, I don't see them as consistent players who average over 35. They just so happen to average over 35, but maybe they're a 1 in every 3 or 1 in every 4 performer. So if you're Shai Hope and you know that the batting around you from 1 down to 7 is at best a 1 in every 3 games performer, I don't think you can change the way you bat. And I think I have to echo something that you said in like your video pod the other day. At least if he does what he's doing, we might see out the 50 overs. So you have to weigh it up. What's better? The guy who can drop anchor at 82 on a good day helps you get to 250. 60 if you 250, 260. Are you likely to defend that? No, but at least there's something. At least there's something on the scorecard to try and get behind. So, and I think, and I've pulled like the raw numbers, Jared. The numbers speak for themselves in so much as when Shai makes runs, we have a better chance of winning. And the raw numbers actually prove that. And in fact, probably more important than that is the inverse. When Shai doesn't make runs, we're really definitely not winning, if that makes sense. And so the numbers do support the tactic, so to speak.
Yeah, and it kind of goes in both ways as well. So he has to make the runs. I think you and I both know there isn't a one-day player in West Indies domestic cricket who's going to come in and average 40 plus, most probably, right? Unless they do it at an even slower strike rate than him. They're not going to do it at a higher strike rate. And then the other problem is, you're right, he gets them in games and he gives them a chance, that's what the anchor does, right? It limits your top end, but it means that you make consistent runs. The problem with the West Indies is I don't think batting is their worst part of ODI cricket. I think their bowling has probably been worse. And when you look at the numbers, it certainly looks a lot worse on paper. And so even if he's keeping them in games, it looks worse because there's, Sheldon Cottrell isn't taking a bunch of wickets at the top, and Sunil Narayan isn't playing, with people's minds, and Obed doesn't do the same thing that he does in T20 cricket, right? So you don't actually have the bowlers to back him up anyway. And so in some ways, that's not his fault, because if his job is to be like the guy who can bat long, as you said, and get them to those mediocre but consistent totals again and again, it's not his fault if no one else in the team can actually, score any runs, and if the bowlers can't take any wickets.
I agree with you, but then let me put the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak. If you know that your bowlers can't do anything, or can't, there's so many elements of this team that can't consistently perform. but if you know your bowlers can't consistently, although they have literally just performed against New Zealand, but if you know your bowlers can't consistently perform to reduce scores under 300, does that mean then that Shai should up his strike rate? Because doesn't it, some would argue, come on, the only way we're going to win is if we get scores of over 330. I mean, recently against India, we put up scores above 300 and couldn't defend them because, as you correctly point out, Jared, the bowling isn't strong enough to defend even if we get over like a 315. Our bowlers might defend 1 in every 10 scores that we make over 300, so to speak. So there is an argument to say that if the stats show that we struggle to defend, and I'm not even counting 310 as a big total, but in West Indies, you have to count as a big total. There's an argument to say, actually, Shai, you go in at 85 and score in 100 off 132 balls, that's not going to cut it. And again, let's be honest, Jared, if a batter is going Shai did this against India recently, in fact. Let me see if I've got it in front of me. Which one was it? Yeah. So recently against India, he made 115 off 135 balls, right? And he went at 85. But I remember that innings. And the reason why I remember it is because he was stuck in the 80s for a long time. And that's what caused the cuss out in the Caribbean, because people saying you're being selfish. By the time you're in the 80s and you've already faced 115 balls, get a move on. So that's why it's good to speak to you as a neutral. Where do you stand on that aspect? So yes, we know what he does, but what about when he gets to the 80s and the 90s and he's still not accelerating at the back end?
It's a very fair thing to say. And I think, interestingly enough, I compare him to Jeff Marsh, who I talked about before, naked batting in your hotel room. And Jeff Marsh did usually accelerate at the end. So Jeff Marsh would be, Jeff Marsh's strike rate in one-day cricket is 55. And if you're thinking, well, one-day cricket back in those days, no, Jeff Marsh was slow by that period. Like, even in that period, Jeff Marsh was slow. But if and this is anecdotally, because we don't have as much ball-by-ball data when it comes to him. I remember him hitting out at the end, right? If he got to 70 and 80 and, he would start to hit out, I think that is a very fair thing with Hope. Just to flip it a little bit, let's talk about that 310 mark, though, you keep talking about, right?
Yeah.
Can they score 310 without him in the team? Will he consistently average 50 or 40 if he's striking at a runner ball rather than, point 8 runs the ball. Are the, is their best hope, and pardon the pun, not he makes 100 off 125 balls and it's horrible and we all wish it didn't happen. But at the other end, off the other 180 balls, the rest of the guys score 220 because that's literally the format of cricket that they're better at anyway. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying he's right, and I'm not saying that is what I would tell the team as an analyst, but is there a part of you that goes, if we're going to make 300, maybe we just need one guy to bat 40 overs and have a bunch of guys swing at the other end?
Yes, and I mean, let's make this clear. I'm actually in favor of what Shai is currently doing. And the wider concern, echoing your point here, is that the other batters who should be doing what you're saying they should be doing don't seem to have the game to bat around Shai. Like, if really and truly, Shai should be a godsend to those batters. Like, imagine, you know that you've got a batter at the other end who basically, maybe 6 times out of 10, if not 7, is going to occupy the crease and take it deep. That's what any team should really want in the 50-over format, admittedly at a better strike rate. That's essentially freeing you up to play your natural game. The problem is these other players around Shai, their natural game seems to be, right, I faced my obligatory 20 balls, I'm out. Whereas I need to face 50 balls at least or something like that. So the critique is that the other players around him don't seem to know how to construct 50-over innings. And again, I go back to the video podcast you did on your channel. I think you made a comment on there where you said, I can't remember who you were referencing it to, but 50-over cricket is more difficult than people realise. And I think some of our players are caught in that kind of no man's land between, yes, I can produce a 20. So Romario Shepherd can produce a 15-ball 40 in 2020 cricket, but finds it hard to somehow make that adjustment to ODI cricket. Now, you're better than me to tell me why it is you think they can't make that adjustment when, in theory, with a guy like Hope at the other end, the freedom is there to try and do that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think what I was really getting at is it's longer than you think. You know, you've played club cricket, right? And if you've been playing a bunch of T20s and you play a 50-over game, suddenly there is you lose 1 wicket and the team starts to panic, and you realize that why that Jeff Marsh anchor position was built was Australia going, well, what we can do here is guarantee the 50 overs more often than not. And that's why Hope is doing that. But you're right. It's like there is a certain freedom amongst the batters if they have to hit 40 off 15, they know they're going to fail 2 or 3 times. That's not what one-day cricket is, though. Even if you're even if you're Lance Klusener or Shahid Afridi, you're still expected to average over 25, aren't you? Right? You know, and that's the whole Glenn Maxwell thing of, I don't think Cricket Australia have ever quite understood Glenn Maxwell, because they're like, we want you to average 45. And he's like, but I want to average 35 with a strike rate of 120. And so there is that sort of constant conflict, I think, in one-day cricket. It was actually, I remember when I talked to Nicholas Pooran during the 2019 World Cup. So I had about an hour with him at one of the hotels, and we were chatting about stuff. And he was saying that, and his situation is different from some of the other guys, as you and I know. He didn't play a lot of one-day cricket, but he did say that it is a different form of white ball cricket because you don't have the freedom and you don't have the ability to just go out and hit. So you're trying to find that, 40 or 30 magic mark, right? The sort of Andrew Simons type innings or Lance Klusener type innings. And what you're not trying to do is the Shahid Afridi innings, right? Yeah. And I wonder if, because a lot of these West Indian players do not play enough list A cricket, that's not actually a skill they are learning enough. And I mean, I haven't looked. How many, off the top of your head, how many times would someone like Obed McCoy or Romario Shepherd play list A cricket? They probably wouldn't have more than 30 games, would they?
Even if we'd not had the pandemic, in list A cricket, you're playing 7 games a year, 8 if you're lucky.
Yep.
1 Super 50 in the year, and that's it, unless you happen to go abroad. And even if you take someone like a Romario Shepherd, he's now getting franchise deals everywhere, so he's not even going to be playing club 50 over cricket. In the Caribbean, our club cricket is 40 overs anyway. So that it echoes the point, Jared. They're not even learning how to construct a 50 over innings. So in many ways, we're getting on, well, we're not, but people are getting on Shai's back for the crime of knowing how to construct a 50 over.
Yeah, exactly.
How to construct a 50 over innings when others don't know.
Yeah, and yes, and we'll continue to talk about the slowness because you can't not. But he's getting it's sort of like that. You know, you watch a basketball game or a football game, and you've got a player out there who dribbles too much, you know, with the ball, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, just pass it! What are you doing?" We're forgetting that he's looking around sometimes and going, "Well, who am I batting with here?" You know, Shamar Brooks. I'm batting with Shamar Brooks, right? Okay. What's he going to do? He's probably not going to make 70 or 80. I'm batting with, I don't know, I can't remember if Johnson Charles and I Hope ever overlapped, but he's batting with what is obviously sub-international level white ball players. They're not bad players, and some of them have other skills that are quite handy to the West Indies. But you're not looking at any of those guys and going, do you know what? These guys are going to average, as you said before, 35 plus consistently, and they're not going to make any damage to the opposition. There is a point where that is affecting him, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, just because I looked it up. So Romario Shepherd is almost 28, and he has played 48 List A games, and of those, 18 are ODI. So what did I say? He wouldn't have played 30. He's played exactly 30 List A games outside of the 18 internationals. Obed has played 21, and 2 of those are ODIs, right? And it's the same with Obed's a different kind of player, and we know he's been injured and, you know, all those sorts of things. We don't even know how good a one-day player he will ever be because he's not getting a lot of chance to work on his game there. Naturally, there's nothing, you watch him bowl, there's nothing he does that shouldn't translate to the one-day game. He's not played a lot of first-class cricket, so we don't know how he will go in red ball cricket, but he can bowl 85 to 90 mile an hour left-arm pace, bang it into the pitch, and he's got variation. He's halfway there, right? But you still have to develop that. And for whatever reason, Hope did manage to develop that one little part of his game. And it does feel unfair picking on him for it, even if you and I are still baffled as to why he's not scoring quicker.
Which is why I go back to the earlier point then, Jared. I'm convinced it has to be deliberate. It's the circumstances dictate what he can currently do. Now, the test will be, if this ODI side ever gets better, and it's a big if, that's why I'm saying there will, hopefully, in his career, there will come a point where he has to change his game. But I don't think it's going to come anytime soon. And the other thing that's worth pointing out as well is you talk about, so you use the example of Romario Shepherd. The other thing that's quite notable is, so Hope, we said earlier on that Hope made his debut in the ODI team in 2016. So he's now had a 6-year ODI career. But if you look at the rest of the players around him, there's 2 noticeable things that people should pick out. One, they're actually all old. They've all made their debuts in like the last year and a bit, and they're all 29, 30. Shamar Brooks is 33. Yannick Correa just debuted. He's 30. Jermaine Blackwood has just come in again. He's 31. Mayers is 29. Akil Hussain is 29. Brandon King is... So these players aren't... They're all coming into the international scene late, but they're not even coming in off the back of having played a significant amount of games. So it's a double whammy. Some are saying, oh, that means they're mature, but international cricket is a completely different beast, and they're coming in at 30, having to suddenly adapt to the rigors of international cricket. And the reason I made that point about Hope, the reason I made the point about 2016 is Hope is now 28, so he's been playing this format since 22 years of age, and West Indies stuck with him, so he knows his game. Do you get where I'm coming from? Whereas all these other players are coming in, recent recruits, and I don't think they're learning on the job, in essence, whereas Hope actually knows the game of ODI cricket, so to speak.
No, I agree. I mean, It is incredible that you see a West Indian come into the team and you check their age. If they're under 28, you throw yourself a little party, don't you? Because that almost seems to be the magic age that they start picking all these guys because they have like one good season. They play a couple of good, club seasons in Trinidad or in Houston or something, and then they get one good season and they get picked. And it's not, again, they haven't been developed properly. Let's get back to the selfish thing, right? Because that's the cuss out, and that is certainly where. When we talk about hope, so I can't remember when it was, but quite a few years ago, I was talking to someone in West Indies crew, quite an experienced senior sort of person with, decision maker. It's probably the best way to put it. And we were talking about him, and he was just like, he's selfish. And so that's kept in my head, and so many fans say the same thing. It's kept in my head. So when I do the research for this thing, the first thing I work out is, if he's selfish, why is he so crap at T20 cricket? He averages less than 20 in T20 cricket with a strike rate of 117. This is off the top of my head, so I hope I've got those two numbers right. Averages about 19 and a half at a strike rate of 117, right? If he was selfish, I would at least expect him to be averaging 25 or 27, right? Or he averaged 20, but maybe he's got a strike rate of 130. There does feel to me, and I looked up Test cricket, because again, I never think of him as a slow-scoring batter in Test cricket. You mentioned before, Sibley and Brathwaite and, and Chandrapal and all these sorts of people. And I looked up his strike rate in Test cricket. It's like, it's bloody slow, mate. It's really, really slow. And so I'm just going to park that. I'm just going to put that to you there, that he bats slow in all formats. And in T20 cricket, which he's also called selfish. If he's being selfish in T20 cricket, then it's the worst form of selfish behavior I've ever seen.
So this is interesting because I saw an innings, was it last year? Apologies if I have it wrong, people. So it was either last year's CPL or the year before that when he was playing for Barbados Royals, where I can vividly picture this innings in my head where he made 20 off 19 from the top. One of those match-losing innings. So I hear this. I definitely hear this, and I can picture some of his 2020 innings. This now begs the question, this is going to be a weird point I put to you. Is his range of shots limited? Because maybe that's the problem. But then whenever you speak to people about Shai Hope, the first thing they say is, glorious cover drive. Oh, he's such a classy player. But maybe we need to dig a bit deeper, and maybe he hasn't got a lot of shots in. I don't know, by the way. I now need to. I'm now testing myself. I need to go back and look again. Maybe he hasn't got the range of shots to be anything other than what he is. So he's playing within his limitations, but those limitations don't work in Test cricket because he gets found out. I hope he's able to overcome that, but his career thus far, he's been found out. And T20 cricket, he doesn't have the range of shots to consistently go at, 140. A strike rate of a 140. Whereas ODI cricket, whatever the quirks of ODI cricket are, actually, Jared, I take that back, because it's not that he's got a game for ODI cricket. He's got the game for the West Indies version of ODI cricket. I don't think he actually got the game for ODI cricket either.
He's got the game for averaging 50. Yeah, he's got the game for averaging 50 in ODI cricket. He doesn't have the game for ODI cricket. No one would pick him. So no, you're completely right. I think the only other thing I would throw into all that is it might be that he's limited. He certainly struggles with seam bowling.
Yes.
Right? And that does seem to be a problem, especially in Test cricket. I don't think he's particularly good against the short ball. So maybe it is limited. But here's the thing. I'm willing to say he's not selfish and that he's limited, right? But I'm going to flip this on you and drop this. You mentioned before that he doesn't actually score any quicker towards the end. Yes. Now, I've already said that Jeff Marsh managed to do that. Almost all the anchors in the world, and this is what an anchor player will always say to you, oh, yeah, you can't judge me when I go out after 20 balls. You got to judge me when I go out after 80 or 120 balls because I'll have caught up, right? The Dawid Malan theory, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't catch up, right? And I do... look, let's say he's limited and it takes him 50 balls to get going. He still never gets to the level where I'm like, okay, well, he took a lot of balls up, but he'll probably hit a couple of boundaries and a couple of fours here and push hard with his runs. There doesn't ever seem to be that kick on that you would expect from an anchor who is well set. And that, to me, again, means he's even more limited than we think he is, or he is incredibly selfish, and even when he's already on 100, he won't put the team first. And I'm willing to say it's either, but there has to be a founding reason why he's playing that way.
I want to give the answer. I really want to say I know. So again, I reference the most recent iteration of him doing exactly what you said. So first ODI versus second ODI, versus India last month. Shai Hope made 115 from 135 balls, and West Indies batted first, and made 311. Now, that should have been enough to win the game. In the end, India chased that. They won by 2 wickets with 3 balls to spare, right? You go back and you look at Hope's innings. He was there. Hope was the last person dismissed in that innings. He was dismissed when West Indies were 300 for 6. So he was pretty much there till the end. I think it's criminal if your team makes 311 and you're dismissed on 300 and you've done 115 off 135 and you end up losing by 2 wickets with 3 balls to go. Yes, Jared, it's easy to look at everybody else, but in a T20 context, you'd say that was a match-losing innings at the top of the... Do you see what I'm trying to say? And I don't want to be that guy, because I have to add that in the context of West Indies LGI cricket, it's harsh to criticise Hope when there's so many other issues. But when you look at games like that, you have to question if that innings is actually as useful as the century makes it look.
Yeah, I think you're very accurate there. There's one thing you forgot to mention as well. He was the 6th wicket.
Yes, sorry.
There were wickets in hand, right?
Yeah.
This is not... If he goes out and they're 8 or 9 down and he's had to carry the tail up to 311, there's a certain sense where you're like, wow, how many risks can he take? Well, you look at that scorecard and you go, I think he could have taken some risks, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't think we're ever going to get to the bottom of this. It'd be really interesting, I mean, he's still so young to listen to how Heath talks about it. And I don't know if he ever will properly because he'll probably feel uncomfortable. Here's my last question to you. Is it possible he's still West Indies' best ODI player? For everything we have just said.
I mean, at the end of the day,
that. I want you to focus on the fact that he actually plays as well, because not all of them do.
I think at the end of the day, in an era of white ball cricket where we've got a player who averages over 50, it seems very churlish to turn round and say, you know what, he's not the best player in the side. But I think you've made a point here. So actually, I'm not going to answer your question because I'm going to answer your question with this question. Would any other top ODI side take him? Because I'm really intrigued because people look at the average and go, well, of course we would. The average is 50, but would a top ODI side, so an England, an India, and New Zealand, okay, I guess Australia, would they take Shai Hope to open? Yes or no? Go through those 4 sides.
No.
Do you think he gets in them?
I mean, based on strike rate, England's not even picking up the phone, are they? They're not even asking him if he's got a passport, right? India have other anchors who can average the same and more at what, 20 plus strike rate, maybe even 25 plus strike rate, maybe even slightly more than that. New Zealand's an interesting one because New Zealand's game plan was set up around basically scoring 260 to 300 and then allowing your bowlers to defend it. Yeah. That said, is there anyone in New Zealand with a strike rate that low? I wouldn't have thought so. And, if you look at Taylor and Williamson, who were sort of their middle over anchors, right? They both had a 5th gear. I'm not sure Hope has a 3rd gear at this stage, right? Australia, I mean, No, I just can't. I think Australia almost rate anchors higher than anyone else.
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine them doing that. He's not getting into current day Pakistan either. South Africa love anchors almost as much as anyone outside of Australia at the moment. But again, I just think their anchors score at a quicker rate.
Yeah.
You're getting down to Ireland would poke your eye out to get him. And you don't want to be in that situation. But I mean, they're using Andy Balbirnie at number 3. So yeah, they gotta take Hope. Bangladesh probably take him. That's fair, isn't it? I mean, they've got a lot of guys who score fairly slow as well. Yeah. I mean, at the very least, I'm not sure. I think he's in the mix for Bangladesh. Maybe that's the better way of putting it, rather than they automatically take him. Sri Lanka probably need him because they have all the other guys smacking it everywhere.
Yeah.
But I don't think he gets into that side either. So you're really left with maybe Bangladesh is a squad player who plays a little bit. And Ireland he plays for. And Afghanistan would take him. Right? Because they'll take anyone who can average over 35. That's not the company you want to be in for your best player.
Right. So you've just answered the question. The teams that you've gone through and said would take Shai in a heartbeat are all the teams down with West. Well, not Bangladesh in fairness, because they're actually quite a good ODI side these days. But it's all the teams down the end, down the bottom with West Indies in the rankings. So, like I say, it's churlish. It's churlish to look at Shai Hope in the context of West Indies cricket and say he's not our best player. But I think to be fair and to be balanced, we'd also have to say on the flip side, but he's only good in the context of being in a subpar West Indian team, and only if and when that West Indian team gets better and they develop an engine room, will we then see if Shai does have that 4-4 fifth gear in his locker to adapt to a changing side. But to be honest, Jared, I don't see him ever having to adapt the way he plays for an improving West Indies in his career, because I don't think that time will come where he'll be asked to do anything other than he's actually doing.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting to know what the conversations with Phil Simmons are on all of this, right? How much have they tried to move him forward? Even his CPL franchises. So there's one team I didn't mention, actually, and it brings us back to sort of the end, which is Scotland. If you were Scotland, and I know Kyle has just retired, I think, from white ball cricket, hasn't he? Oh, he's retired from something anyway. But obviously, Kyle, you would have had Kyle, George Munsey, and Callum McLeod. Kyle was never going to average as much as Hope, but has the ability to punish teams a little bit more at times. George Munsey is a wrecking ball who may never quite get the most out of himself because he's a bit of a late starter. Callum McLeod does a very similar role to Hope, except for the fact that we saw him absolutely destroy England. And we know he does have at the least, well, probably a fifth gear. It takes him a while to get into it because he's an anchor. That top three, you'd say Hope probably gets into their top four, let's say. But you're not sure where he fits into that. And I know Scotland have an abnormally talented top three for a non-test playing nation, right? But at the same time, Michelle, what are we talking about when we're even having to bring up Scotland? And there's a reason that the West Indies struggled to beat them before the last World Cup, right? So, yeah, I don't think we've answered anything here today, but we've had a lot of fun. But if you can ever get him on, get him on the podcast, on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast one time, you got to find out, like, how this happened and why this happens and whether he's happy with it. Because I feel like he's gone through... He's now one of the best ODI run scorers consistently.
Exactly.
Before anyone's really gone, well, wait a minute. How has he ended up making this many runs this slowly? And this is a thing. He's got double the runs of the next best West Indian since he got into the side. He's literally batting on his own half the time.
But it's good that you end here, Jared, because at the end of the day, we do still have to go back to the stats on paper. He's got 13 ODI hundreds, and that's nothing to be sniffed at. And part of me thinks, how many other players in world cricket would love to know? Do you know how many players in world cricket right now would love to end their career and go, I got 13 ODI hundreds at the end of my career? So we can't we can't not give him his flowers, so to speak. But then how many players would turn around and go, well, if I was instructed to bat at 85, I'd have 13 ODI, I'd have 13 ODI hundreds as well. So I don't know which side of the line you lie on there.
I mean, you and I have been on both sides of this line all the way through. The more I discuss it, the more confused I am. But I thank you very much for allowing me on your podcast. Thank you very much for coming on my podcast. And, you know, good luck to Hope in the future. You know, at the very least, wouldn't it be nice if he cracked 80 with that strike rate? You know, wouldn't that be a little boon to him at this stage? He'll probably end up averaging 60 in one-day cricket with a strike rate of 82, and it'll just make us more confused.
Listen, thanks for having me on, Jared. And thanks for you coming on mine as well. Much appreciated.